Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
And welcome to Mr. Hutchings History. And this is Mr. Hutchings. And this podcast is dedicated to studying events in history which have contributed to our world as we know it. Today we're going to dive into feminist movements in Canada and the United States from the 1960s onwards. I'm going to examine how these movements emerged as powerful forces and catalyzed lasting change. I'll explore pivotal moments, organizations, influential individuals, and legal battles, and analyze how the struggle for gender equality gained traction in both countries of the United States and Canada. Today's title, Pressure for Change, Feminism in Canada and the USA post-1960. The Canadian feminist movement, growth through organization and political pressure. In Canada, the post-1960s feminist movement gained momentum through a combination of political organization and strategic pressure on the government. The Committee of the Equality of Women, established in 1966, was instrumental as an umbrella organization uniting multiple women's rights groups in Canada. This coalition approach strengthened the movement's voice, allowing it to effectively advocate for political and reforms that would benefit Canadian women. One of the most impactful developments came from the government itself, championed by Judy LaMarsh, LaMarsh. Elected as a member of Parliament, an MP, for Niagara Falls in 1960, LaMarsh soon became a notable figure in Canadian politics. In 1963, she was appointed as Minister of Health and Welfare under Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson. LaMarsh was a well-known advocate for social reforms and took an active role in addressing women's issues. Notably, her work laid the foundation for Canada's social security policies through her involvement in the drafting of the Canada Pension Plan. When the Committee for the Equality of Women threatened a protest march on Canada's capital in 1967, it brought significant attention to women's rights issues, pressuring Prime Minister Pearson to establish the Royal Commission on the Status of Women that same year of 1967. This Royal Commission, a landmark moment in Canadian feminism, investigated women's social, economic, and legal statuses, ultimately providing a report in 1970 that recommended reforms in pay equity, access to childcare, and protection for pregnant workers. The Commission's findings galvanized the feminist movement in Canada and influenced future policies promoting gender equality. And for students who are listening, who plan to write a paper on feminism that involves Canada, the Royal Commission on the Status of Women should never be missed. The American feminist movement, legal reforms, and rising voices. In the United States, the feminist movement gained significant traction throughout the 1960s and into the 1970s. Historian Michael Healy noted that unlike other movements of the 1960s, such as the counterculture and student protests, feminism became an all but irresistible force by the 1970s, indicating its enduring influence on American society. The United States presented stark examples of institutionalized gender inequality. Women constituted a large part of the workforce, yet their roles were largely limited to lower-level positions. In the early 1960s, women represented 80% of all teachers, but only 10% of all school principals. And while women made up 40% of university students, only 10% of university faculty positions were occupied by women. Additionally, discriminatory laws in many states restricted women's autonomy and legal rights. 18 U.S. states prevented women from serving on a jury. 17 American states restricted women from bartending, and some states even required women to have a male co-signer for financial agreements. Schools could expel pregnant girls just for being pregnant, and married women in certain states could be denied birth control access without their husband's approval. The entrenched nature of these inequalities led to articulate middle-class women demanding change, and the cultural backdrop of the 1960s, characterized by activism and the African American civil rights movement, provided a template for feminist advocacy in the United States. Women began calling for equal pay, equal opportunities, and respect in both the workplace and the legal sphere. The influence of the Presidential Commission and key organizations. The feminist movement in the United States benefited from established activist traditions, including the National Woman's Party, which had been advocating for women's rights since 1916. Influential social feminists, often affiliated with labor unions and the Democratic Party, which also played a role. The lobbying of these social feminists led President John F. Kennedy to establish the Presidential Commission on the Status of Women in 1961, a significant step in institutionalizing the examination of women's rights at the federal level in the United States. This Presidential Commission, chaired by the famous Eleanor Roosevelt, published a report in 1963 which called for equal pay, improvement in opportunities for women in the workplace. However, it also recommended special training for women in marriage and motherhood, which reflected the era's prevailing notion that women had a primary role in the home. The Commission stopped short of endorsing the Equal Rights Amendment, often abbreviated as the ERA, a proposed amendment to the U.S. Constitution which would guarantee gender equality in the United States. The formation of the National Organization for Women, the NOW organization, in 1966, led by Betty Friedan and other prominent activists, marked a pivotal moment, when NOW began to seek legal and social equality for women, calling for the enforcement of existing civil rights laws and demanding new legislation to combat discrimination experienced by women. The organization took on a wide array of issues, including workplace inequality, reproductive rights, and education. This comprehensive approach helped NOW to become one of the most influential feminist groups in the United States. Moving on to economic pressures and the changing workforce. The increasing participation of women in the workforce was a crucial factor behind the feminist movement's growth in both Canada and the United States. In the U.S., twice as many women were employed in 1968 as in 1940, making women more aware of workplace inequalities. Working women were often confined to lower-paying traditional female jobs, such as secretarial work or teaching, which reinforced gendered economic disparities as these jobs often pay less. The Equal Pay Act of 1963, though a landmark legislation, was only a first step. Women still faced significant wage gaps and were denied opportunities for advancements. In Canada, similar patterns emerged. Although Canadian women increasingly entered the workforce, they were typically found in low-paying positions within sectors such as retail, education, and domestic services. The feminist movement's demands for pay equity, childcare, and maternity leave were driven by the economic realities facing these working women. The Royal Commission on the Status of Women recommended help securing important protections, including the extension of maternity leave policies and the creation of government-supported childcare options. Schools of Historical Thought on Post-1960 Feminist Movements. The feminist movements of Canada and the United States have been interpreted through several schools of historical thought, each which provides unique insights into the movement's causes, developments, and impacts. Liberal feminists advocate for gender equality through legislative reform, emphasizing equal rights and opportunities within the existing political framework. They view achievements such as the Equal Pay Act of 1963 and the establishment of the Royal Commission on the Status of Women and the Canadian Human Rights Act of 1977 as key victories. This perspective focuses on legal strategies to dismantle discriminatory practices. They argue that societal transformation can occur incrementally in small steps through policy changes. The feminist Marxist perspective is a school which interprets gender inequality as a consequence of capitalist exploitation. They contend that true gender equality requires restructuring the economic system itself. Marxist feminists argue that women's unpaid labor in the home and their confinement to low-paying jobs serve capitalist interests by perpetuating a cheap labor pool. These Marxist feminists view economic independence for women as a prerequisite for genuine gender equality, critiquing the feminist movement's focus on legal reforms without addressing class inequalities. Intersectional feminism examines how various social identities such as race, class, and gender identity intersect with gender, shaping women's experiences differently. This perspective critiques the early feminist movement's focus on the concerns of the middle class. They critique the early focus of feminist movements because the early feminist movements were largely middle class and white women, and their concerns were the concerns of middle class white women. Intersectional feminists like to highlight the disparity suffered or experienced by Black, Indigenous, or First Native, First American people, and working class women, because they often face compounded discrimination by their ethnic background or racial background and the fact that they're also women. So they have an approach that feminism needs to be more inclusive and should be broadly understood within the feminine discourse, and they will see advocacy for women's rights. Particularly, the Canadian feminists will advocate for Indigenous women's rights in an effort to include all women. Radical feminism challenges the structural foundations of patriarchy, calling for a fundamental rethinking of gender roles and society norms. Radical feminists argue that male dominance is embedded in every aspect of society, including family structures, education, and legal systems. Radical feminists will advocate for transformational changes rather than piecemeal reforms. They won't want incremental steps. They want big change, and they want it now. They will push for a restructuring of gender relations. This school of thought gained momentum in the 1970s, particularly in discussions about reproductive rights, domestic violence, and sexual harassments. Finally, I'd like to discuss the legacy and impact of post-1960 feminist movements. The feminist movements in Canada and the United States have left a profound legacy, as I'm sure you well know, that continues to shape society today. In Canada, the recommendations from the Royal Commission on the Status of Women influence policy decisions, leading to enhanced child care options, maternity leave protections, and pay equity measures. These advancements help to position Canada as a leader in gender equality policies, particularly with the passage of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 1982, which enshrined gender equality as a constitutional right. In the United States, the feminist movement achieved significant legal victories such as Title IX of the Educational Amendments Act in 1972, which prohibited gender discrimination in federally funded education programs. This legislation dramatically increased opportunities for women in sports and higher education. However, the United States did fail to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, which fell 3 states short of ratification in 1982. And the failure of the Equal Rights Amendment, or ERA, does highlight the challenges that remain in achieving full gender equality in the United States today. I'd like to thank you for joining me for this episode of Mr. Hutchings History. Through these stories of the feminist movements in Canada and the United States, we can gain insight into the ongoing struggle for gender equality and the transformative power of collective activism. Stay tuned as we continue exploring pivotal moments in history, and as I continue to challenge some tongue-twisting words with the many scripts that I provide in advance for you. I do this in dedication to the students I have and my care and support that I have for my learners studying these topics, and also for my own love of history itself. If you can, like my show, give me full stars here on Spotify. I enjoy doing this, and as a teacher, I feel like I'm a risk taker, and this is new to me, and I am enjoying it. And I enjoy these podcasts and also leaving information for students who sometimes miss classes, absent, or just don't pay attention that day. I appreciate doing these for those that learn at different rates. I want you to have a great day. Leave a comment, say something nice to somebody today, and enjoy yourself. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.